Acts 22 and 23. Well, the immediate challenge of this reading is to ask, what in the world could Paul have said that would have merited the reaction by his hearers when they said this in 22:22? They raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit to live." What could Paul have said that was that violent? Well, again, the setting of chapter 22 goes back to 21:28. This is the man, they're saying about Paul, who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the Jews, against the law, and against this place, and furthermore, he has brought Greeks into the temple. Again, it's not just these things, but they're trying to add it all up and saying, here's how we know he's against all these things. We have Greeks in the temple, Greeks in the holy place. And that is enough for them to set up this scene where he's going to be given this sentence. And by the way, this really helps us again realize when I have recommended that Jesus' death solved the ritual cleanliness of Gentiles through the book of Acts and some of the writings we've seen, I think this again bolsters that idea that that's important enough in the argument, the theological argument of Paul, that when we talk about this kind of thing being a violent enough idea that people want him to die, that Jesus' death solves this, I think, is a very real possibility. Well, then Paul begins his speech in chapter 22 by saying, "I'm zealous toward God, much like you men are. I was even taught by Gamaliel," who's the same Gamaliel back in Acts 5:34, a very level-headed Orthodox teacher. Paul took a path against Christians. He's trying to, again, say to these men listening, I was just like you. Very extremely zealous for Torah and for Torah's God. But then Paul met Jesus. And again, it's not just this evening vision or dream he had, but he actually met the resurrected Jesus, and he finds out from Jesus that he had been persecuting the risen Messiah, acting against the very person and things that he had thought he believed in, acting even against God. So his speech ends this way, again, that causes them to say this: Jesus said to me, "Depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles." Well, there it is, bingo. That word is said at the very end of his speech, which causes them to reply this way. The word in Greek is ethne, which has the concept of just the nations of the world. Well, the saving moment for Paul, quite literally, is a Roman tribune gets in the way and saves him from this crowd, and physically is able to get him under guard. Paul even claims then he has Roman citizenship, which now Paul will use Roman citizenship as a means of staying free from his Jewish captors. My suspicions are, in fact, well, it's not hard to imagine this, that if Rome had not come into play at this point in Paul's life, in a very general sense, that Paul would end up just like Stephen in Acts 7. He would have been a martyr. So Paul is not on trial here with Rome. In fact, going forward, Paul is wanting to be charged by Rome or brought into a Roman kind of a court setting, because he wants to be proven innocent of treason. That's much more important than being proven innocent of Jewish tradition or breaking Jewish tradition. He knows he's probably guilty of that, and he is going to be found guilty by his Jewish countrymen, even if they have to lie about it. But that's why he's going to depend now upon Rome in many ways. Paul simply wants Rome to admit that he's not acting with any treasonous ideals and is not causing anyone around him to be acting treasonous. Well, Acts 23 is a pretrial hearing in front of Ananias. Now, he is a Jewish high priest. Again, these men want him to be found guilty of Jewish law, so they take him in front of the high priest for, like I say, a pretrial hearing. And he's a collaborator with Rome, Ananias is. He's very cruel. He'll be assassinated in AD 66, coming up here by some Jewish zealots. Well, Paul immediately is slapped by Ananias's henchman, and Paul responds with, "You thinly veneered scoundrel." It shows that Paul's not against or not above an angry retort of his own. But then Paul notices in this hearing that he's in 23 two things that he realizes he's going to have to make a move on this issue, and that is, one, he is not going to get a fair trial, again, based on who's in the room. This is Sadducees and Pharisees. There's no Rome is just listening from the side at this point, so he's now in a hearing here, and he realizes that because of that he's not going to get a fair trial. He also, as I just said, he realizes half the crowd is Pharisee and half the crowd is Sadducee, so he decides to bring up the issue of resurrection, which again Sadducees do not believe in, and it adequately divides the crowd into their own discussion. At that point, a Roman tribune, once again now, Rome gets involved, and a tribune comes in and actually rescues Paul, quite literally, again, from the scene, taking him to a barracks there by the fortress Antonia. They're still in Jerusalem. It's there that Jesus reassures Paul that even though he's not going to be miraculously spared anything from this point forward, he will not die in Jerusalem, and he, in fact, will get to Rome. Some of the Jews then, presumably from this crowd that had met before and seen him in the temple, they decide, and more than 40 men make an oath that they will not eat or drink until they kill Paul. Again, it shows the violence that they have to this idea of Gentile inclusion. So this oath is heard by Paul's nephew, a person we hear about here and only here. Paul sends his nephew to the centurion. The centurion in short order puts together a large contingent of Romans to again protect Paul from his own Jewish fellows. And he is taken then by these Roman guards, as it were, with a letter telling Festus what's going on. They take him to Caesarea, where Paul will now spend until Acts 27, about verse 2. So Paul is now going to be in Caesarea, but what's important, again, to the story is that Paul has adequately allowed the government, Rome in this case, that is not, again, for Jesus, not for Yahweh, obviously, but he realizes they can be a protector from between him and his own countrymen when it comes to the ministry that he's going to have. So Paul will now go down to Caesarea, where he will continue to have a ministry, even though it will be in prison.